to No More Warehousing, Time for Housing and Dignity for Nova Scotians Severely Physically Disabled. I'm Cher Smith. Unfortunately, I'm not a real moderator. The real moderator, Stephen Kimball, unfortunately was stuck in Cuba. I guess it's a good place to be stuck in if you're going to be stuck. And so he couldn't attend tonight. So he sends his regrets. So now to begin, first we'd like to acknowledge that we are on unceded Mi'kmaq territory. Next we'd like to do a few thank yous. First of all, we'd like to thank all of you for showing up. This would be a lot less fun if these seats were empty. And we really appreciate everyone's interest and their attendance this evening. We also want to thank the Office of Accessibility for their help in financial support for our ASL interpreters this evening. And we'd also like to thank Sue LeBlanc, one of our elected officials who's present somewhere. There she is. And a special thanks to Maria Medioli, the new head of disability support at the Department of Community Services, for attending this evening. All right, I'm soon going to hand it over to Jen Powley for the introduction. I'm very fortunate to have met Jen quite some time ago through my work as an occupational therapist. Yes, I said fortunate, not unfortunate. Yeah. To sum up, which we could just talk about that tonight, but we won't. Because your head rest would be terrible. So to sum up, Jen is an award-winning author. She's a hilarious person. She's a tireless advocate for others, but you are a reluctant advocate for yourself. She's driven, and she is absolutely a force, and she's the catalyst for all of us being here tonight. So I'm going to leave it up to you.
Thank you, Cher. The Directory of Nursing Homes and Residential Care Facilities, published by the Department of Health and Wellness, states, nursing homes are an option for people who have difficulty performing everyday tasks, such as dressing or bathing, and are appropriate for those who are medically stable, yet have nursing needs beyond home care. If nursing homes are an option, what other options are there for people with severe physical disabilities? There is self-managed, attendant care administered by the Department of Health. If you qualify for that program, the department provides funding that covers 6 or 7 hours of attendant care per day, depending on what the attendant charges per hour. What is an individual like me supposed to do for the remaining 17 or 18 hours? For me, it looks like a nursing home might be the only option. According to the 2016 census, there are 240 Nova Scotians between the ages of 18 and 60 who have also had to go down that route and reside in a nursing home, despite being young and having much to offer their communities. According to a website for an alliance of the adult residential centers and regional rehabilitation centers, mainly in areas outside Halifax, another 600 Nova Scotians with a mix of physical and intellectual disabilities, as well as some with psychiatric disabilities, are housed in an institutional setting, meaning that at least 840 Nova Scotians living with a disability are institutionalized. People are finally becoming aware of the crisis in long-term care in Nova Scotia. There was the 2016 report from the Nurses Union about the inadequacy of staffing levels. Then the report from the Minister's Expert Advisory Panel, released January of this year, which states, increasing staff at the point of care is needed immediately to assist with activities of daily living. It goes on to note, it was most profound to hear from staff and many of the sector representatives about the guilt and shame they feel not being able to provide adequate care. And yet, Premier Stephen MacNeil continues to say he is not putting any more funding into nursing homes. What better alternatives to nursing homes exist? Canada ratified the United Nations Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities back in 2010. The convention states in Article 19 that countries that ratify the convention recognize the equal right of all persons with disabilities to live in the community with choices equal to others, and shall take effective and appropriate measures to facilitate full enjoyment by persons with disabilities of this right and their full inclusion and participation in the community, including by ensuring that a. Persons with disabilities have the opportunity to choose their place of residence and where and with whom they live on an equal basis with others and are not obliged to live in a particular living arrangement. B. Persons with disabilities have access to a range of in-home, residential and other community support services, including personal assistance, necessary to support living and inclusion in the community and to prevent isolation or segregation from the community. What do those 840-some people living in institutional settings have to say about their choice of where, with whom, and how they live? Was their choice made on an equal basis with others? The fact that we are having this panel tonight tells me that Canada, and in particular Nova Scotia, is not living up to this part of the convention. In 2017, Nova Scotia passed the Accessibility Act, which states that the government acknowledges it must take a leadership role in the process of achieving an accessible Nova Scotia. I would like to see the government live up to this leadership role. I would like them to uphold their commitment to the UN Convention the Government of Canada ratified. And I would like them to stop their blatant discrimination against people with severe physical disabilities. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Jen. So the evening will be, we'll have some videos as well as panel people will be speaking live in front of us. The next thing that we're going to see is a video from Frazee. She is, among many things, a professor emeritus of disability studies at Ryerson University. She now lives in Baxter's Harbor, overlooking the Bay of Fundy, but can't be here because cleverly she's in Arizona.
Hello, I'm Frazee. I greet you today from the traditional and unceded land of the Tohono O'odham people. I offer my respect to elders among us, both past and present. We have so much to learn today and always from their histories of belonging that have been erased. We have so much to learn from their traditional ways of stewardship of the land and care for its people. A dear friend of mine, Harriet McBride Johnson, is no longer with us, but in the way that a woman's life and words weave themselves indelibly into the fabric of history, Harriet is here with us. Like Jen Powley, Harriet was a fine writer, a fierce truth-teller, and a rock star in our long march toward liberation. 15 years ago, Harriet published a piece in the New York Times Magazine titled "The Disability Gulag." I summon Harriet's words and I conjure up this image of the Gulag because that's really what we're talking about here today. The place where people disappear. The place that has care and protection spelled out in friendly script on the sign outside its gates. But on the other side of those gates, well, care feels a lot more like control. And protection, well, that's just another word for lockup. As Harriet declared, you don't vanish into the gulag because that is what you want, or because that is what you need. You vanish because that is what your government offers. You make your choice from an array of one. Today, in many voices, we call out this ruthless and unjust practice. Today, we shine a light on the human suffering and loss behind a veil of bureaucratic inertia and indifference. We're mad, and we're not going to disappear without a fight. We will fight at the polling stations, and we will fight in the courts. But today we're taking that fight to the streets, to the water coolers, to the campus commons, and to the 6 o'clock news. Today we are asking our friends and our neighbors and our allies to join us. So let's be clear. We're not asking for a nicer gulag. We're not asking for a smaller gulag, nor for a gulag that's okay for other people, just not people like us. No. We are all in this together because we need actually no reminder that the gulag is just one calamity or one simple misstep away for each and every one of us. We want the gates of the gulag opened in a genuine and meaningful way. Not just people booted out to fend for themselves, but people escorted, accompanied, empowered, and resourced to live outside the gulag walls. We are asking nothing more than the care that we need, when we need it, and where we need it, in the homes and communities of our choosing. Now, we know the game, we know the pushback. The experts will come out from their boardroom briefings, and they will assure us that this is more complicated than we think. You bet it's complicated. This strategy of keeping us isolated and weak. It is indeed a complicated and convoluted diversionary tactic. This waiting game of bleeding us of every resource that we have every penny of our savings and capital, every possible favor that we can call in. And then, and only then, when our pockets are empty and our options are zip, only then do they rush in, all largesse and enlightenment, to pick up the tab for that precious gulag bed. So listen up, Nova Scotia. In Harriet's words, the government should pay for the help that we need, and it should not force us to give up our freedom as the quid pro quo. You've heard it today. It's possible, and it's affordable. And bonus, investment in the caregiving sector, care workers who are paid fair wages and benefits and who work directly for the people they support, well, that kind of investment is one of the important pillars of a new green economy. It's also one of the hallmarks of a just and inclusive society. So come on, Nova Scotia, let's do it.
Claire MacNeil is a lawyer with legal aid and legal counsel for the Disability Rights Coalition. She recently fought the Human Rights Tribunal about people with disabilities kept in Emerald Hall at the Dartmouth Hospital for years, even though they were medically approved for discharge. So, Claire, can you please explain in brief the Human Rights Tribunal with which you were recently involved?
In brief, and I have 5 or 6 minutes to do this, so it should be no
Hold
problem.
5. I'll give you a minute.
Okay. So, the human rights complaint wasn't filed precipitously. It followed many, many years of advocacy and activism and talking to government and trying to resolve the problem of exclusion and segregation in any way possible other than litigation. But at the end of the day, and I represented the Disability Rights Coalition, which is a cross-disability group that is dedicated to making human rights happen for people with disabilities in Nova Scotia, they decided that that was the only way. And it's sort of, I'll take you through the process, but the purpose of the human rights complaint is basically to demand accountability from the Nova Scotia government. So it's not to, somehow design the solution. The solutions, I would, from all the work we've done, and we can talk about that. I think the solutions are there. I don't think it's something that needs more reports or more studies or more kind of research. I think it's being done elsewhere, including people in community, all people, including people with disabilities. So the purpose of the human rights complaint is to force government to meet their legal obligations and to provide community-based options for people with disabilities. So that's where the thing kind of started. And we heard from Jen. She spoke about the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that has been endorsed by the Canadian government, the way our process works, so it's not immediately enforceable in Nova Scotia, even though we say it is the law. And so there is Article 19, which really spells it out, and you may say, well, doesn't that answer the question? And unfortunately, the answer is no. So we use the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act, which says that certain treatment violates people's human rights, that the government can be held to account for that. And so we kind of framed the case of exclusion and segregation based on this notion of discrimination, also an aspect of human rights in addition to Article 19. I think that it's beyond a controversy that the system that exists in Nova Scotia is inadequate and it's inappropriate. Even the government representatives who testified before the Board of Inquiry admitted that. So what divides us is whether that's discrimination, whether that meets the technical requirements for discrimination under the Human Rights Act. Really what the Disability Rights Coalition is, in broad terms, what it's advocating for is a person-centered approach. And even the government funded reports support that notion, although there's lots of arguments on the details about what that means. In terms of the discrimination, there's no question that the government's actions and inactions over decades have adversely affected people with disabilities. There is a huge disadvantage to the system as it exists, but the question for the Board of Inquiry that's currently deliberating on this and trying to make up its mind about at the first stage is whether this disadvantage is sufficiently connected to disability to constitute discrimination. So you may ask, what is the nature of the discrimination? And it is the unnecessary institutionalization of people with disabilities. And in Nova Scotia, it's not well known. A really obvious example is the Nova Scotia Hospital, because it's right here in town and we know where it is, and it's a provincial institution, draws people from all over the province. But scattered around our province are 9 large institutions and many sort of mid-range institutions, 50 people or around that number. They're, kind of tucked away in out-of-the-way spots. One of the individual complainants in this proceeding spent a very long time at, starting from the age of 14, was an institution located on a place called County Home Road near Waterville. And it's called County Home Road because that's where the poorhouse used to be. And so it went from being a poorhouse to now it's a road that has only two neighbors on it. One is the RRC, which is a regional rehabilitation center exclusively for people with disabilities. It's a segregated, isolated place, and a jail. So that's their neighbor. Some would say not too much separates them physically and otherwise. So that's kind of the history. And part of what we're claiming as well is that the nature of the discrimination, it's disability that's at its root, but also poverty. If we all had $1 million, we wouldn't choose to live in a place like the RRC in Waterville. We'd find a place in the community. So poverty really does underpin our human rights complaint as well. So what else did I want to say? I also wanted to say that the case is also about wait lists. It's about these decades-long, in some cases, wait lists that they now admit that they have wait lists. There was a time when community services kind of didn't even really admit to that, but I'm going back a few decades. But now there's wait lists, so we know there are wait lists, but we don't know how long people are going to have to wait. We don't know what's going to be at the end of the road when they get to the top of the wait list. And in the meantime, they're in inadequate and inappropriate settings. And also forced dependency on friends and family in situations where, oftentimes we hear about parents are ill or elderly, they're really struggling to keep it together, and there really is no light at the end of the tunnel. They'd like to have their loved ones settled in a home and where they're able to live independently in the community, and it's a really tough struggle for a lot of families who aren't able to make those kind of plans because community services has them on a kind of indefinite waiting game. So I just wanted to do one. I just wanted to say one more thing, and that relates to what I just said. That it's not really about knowing what the problem is. You're all here because you know what the problem is, I assume, or that you want to learn more about it. And so I'm just saying that we're trying to mobilize as well people to approach their elected representatives in Nova Scotia, starting with the Premier, and to let the Premier know that action needs to be taken right now, you don't need to continue to fight, pay for lawyers and litigate this thing. They can stretch this human rights complaint out for years longer. We filed in 2014. They've already taken us to the Court of Appeal twice. This could go on for a very long time in terms of the legal process, but it could be solved tomorrow if we had a legislative multi-year commitment to funding the programs that were recommended and endorsed by the government in the roadmap in 2013. So this is just a quick call out. I'm sorry I'm taking an extra minute. Just to say, if everybody in this room were to write the Premier tomorrow and give him that message, I think that would have a big impact.
Thank you. Great, thank you. Next we have Carrie Ernst. She's the Executive Director of Independent Living Nova Scotia, a disability advocate and strategic planner of supportive programming. So our question for you this evening is, how are the housing needs of people with severe physical disabilities different than the average person?
Thanks so much. I was glad that Jen gave me a specific question because when she asked me to sit on the panel, I just figured I was going to be able to just talk about what I'm passionate about.
5 minutes.
I know. Well, so I know. Okay, I have to focus. So, in comparing the housing needs of persons with disabilities and the average person, I've chosen to discuss 4 separate but interrelated concerns that continue to create systemic barriers for persons with disabilities in our community. The first barrier of discussion is income, and Claire touched on that. The 2012 Canadian Survey on Disability from StatsCan cites the employment rate for persons with a severe physical disability in Nova Scotia is about 42.9%, 25.8% for those with very severe disabilities, compared to the employment rate of 72.5% for Nova Scotians without a disability. Many of the people with severe physical disabilities either continue to have systemic barriers to employment or are unable to work. Needless to say, the level of income for these persons with disabilities is generally much lower than their able-bodied counterparts. The next barrier is the access to affordable and accessible housing. Although there would appear to be continuous construction of new rentals and condo units in Halifax, the affordable, accessible housing continues to be a barrier for persons with disabilities and their advocates. Many of the existing units can cost anywhere between $1,200 and $1,500 a month for a 1-bedroom and are not financially feasible options for persons with severe physical disabilities, of whom many have a lower income. Thirdly, directly related to the cost of an accessible unit is the barrier of the amount of space or the square footage required in order to properly develop an accessible unit. In a densely populated area like the Halifax Peninsula, space is hard to come by, and one item companies use to calculate rental charges is the square footage of the space. More square footage means a higher cost. This is yet another example of systemic barriers for accessible housing for persons with disabilities. An able-bodied person can choose to live in a smaller space for a lower rental cost. The physical space needed for accessibility is outside the control of the person with a severe physical disability. Finally, access to services like home care and personal care are often another considerable factor of how housing needs differ for a person with a severe physical disability compared to the average person. Although there are government programs in place such as the provincially funded home care and self-managed care, consumers with severe physical disabilities are voicing concern that these programs, even at their maximum funding allotment, do not cover the care that they need. Many of the people with severe physical disabilities require 24-hour non-medical or personal care. The before-mentioned public programs at the maximum level only cover 7 hours of care per day, which leaves any other necessary costs to be assumed by the individual. These additional costs to be able to live independently are non-existent for the average person, but yet any other barrier for persons with severe physical disabilities. When these barriers, and there are many more ones that I want to discuss here tonight at the panel, but I only have 5 minutes.
Just saying.
Add up. An individual is left with next to no options to foster dignity and independence. Many individuals are faced with the decision this entire panel of experts are here to discuss, to be warehoused or institutionalized because the system has not only failed them, but can actively work against them and their needs. Our housing strategy for persons with severe physical disabilities is in need of reform. And I guess I'm going to state the United Nations Human Rights Article 19 again. The rights to live independently and be included in the community emanates from the core human rights principle that all humans are born equal in dignity and rights. Through promoting, enabling, and inclusive environments for all, including persons with disabilities, it aims to prevent abandonment and segregation and to enable the full development of personality and capabilities of persons with disabilities. It is founded on the general principles of the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, including the respect for inherent dignity, individual autonomy, and independence for the of persons with disabilities and their full and effective participation and inclusion in society. For those of you that are affected in any way, shape, or form, whether it be directly or indirectly, we at Independent Living are going to ask folks to take a look at our website or our Facebook page. We are collecting statistics on this due to some work that we're doing right now on a business model around 24/7 shared attendant care. So there will be a survey available for folks if you can take 10 or 15 minutes to fill that out so that we've got some information to compile and present to government. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Carrie. Next, we're going to go back to video. This video that we have is Bonnie Sherr Klein, and Bonnie's a longtime filmmaker and directed a critically acclaimed documentary called Shameless, The Art of Disability, which follows 5 Canadians with disabilities, including our other video speaker, Catherine Frazee, as they discuss art and advocacy in disability.
Hello from British Columbia, and thanks, Jen, for the invitation to participate. I wish I could be with you in person to meet you all and to see how this historic event unfolds. First, a bit of my own story. Over 30 years ago, I had a devastating stroke due to a congenital malformation in my brain. I was on a respirator, quadriplegic, and locked in without speech. I lived many months in a variety of hospital and rehab institutes. I improved over the years, but still have mobility issues, which are increasing with age. For now, I live at home with my husband. Through my various hospitalizations and the disability rights movement, I have met many folks who have more significant disabilities than I, like Jen and Catherine Frazee, who you will hear next. With the right supports, each of them lives productive, valuable lives in the communities. If they were warehoused and hidden away, it would be all of our great loss, as well as a human rights crime. I think we suffer from a lack of imagination about just how different things could be. The people who are saying no more warehousing tonight can imagine something different. They have the vision and will to create a homegrown, innovative living situation with the qualities of autonomy, dignity, and interdependence. A place where people with very significant disabilities can live in close proximity together so they can share care, which they direct themselves. Frankly, the housing options for people with significant physical disabilities abroad and in Canada are still very limited. Most community small housing options are for people with developmental disabilities. Studies show that people's health declines when they enter institutions. Outcomes are always better in the community. And there are precedents. In Vancouver, we have a nonprofit agency, Vancouver Resource Society. VRS has established over 150 housing units for adults with significant physical disabilities. Most of these are individual accessible suites, usually 6 to 12 suites within a condominium building with a mixed demographic. Seniors, single-parent families, a great mix. Residents manage their own support staff and share resources for overnight care who stays in a staff room. VRS has developed a viable financial model in partnership with the federal, provincial, and municipal governments and the developers. They have demonstrated that it's more cost-effective for a group of, say, 4 to live in the same place with shared care than 4 people to live in an institution. I haven't met Jen yet, but I can tell you about another woman with multiple sclerosis. Ellen and I met when she was first diagnosed in 1992. We were both veterans of the women's movement, both dipping into the disability rights movement for the first time. The big difference between us is that I was gradually getting better, while she would inevitably get worse. Forgive the values terms here. We became sisters in disability. Ellen's physical condition did deteriorate. She had great support from her family and friends, and the maximum home support and social assistance. When she was no longer safe living at home alone, especially in the vulnerable overnight period, she ended up in so-called supportive living. At first she was relieved with the extensive physical care she received. In her own apartment in a new and spacious facility, she shared 24/7 care with 6 other people who also needed support. Sounds good, eh? Well, not as it turned out. The 6 residents never met each other. There were no group activities. The staff often came in with exactly 7 minutes to dress, bathe, feed, or medicate Ellen. Visiting friends like me were perceived of as impediments to getting the job done. While Ellen's physical needs were taken care of, her spiritual, intellectual, and emotional life were diminishing. She lost her sense of personal value. Within 2 years, she opted for medically assisted death before she would lose her mental capacity to choose. Ellen had been warehoused. If she had been able to live with others, been able to share the care they needed while living autonomously, to manage their own staff and to be part of a community to which she could contribute her skills and her love, she probably would not have chosen to die when she did. If you have read Just Jane, you know Jen is not only brilliant, but also shockingly frank. She speaks without shame or self-pity about bodily functions and malfunctions. Jen, and so many others like her, have learned to accept what we have been dealt, to work around obstacles, to invent solutions, whether like Jen, a unique way of bending her fork so she could stab her food, or a relationship of mutuality with a personal care worker, assistant, or her lover. And you may have discovered the humor which characterizes not only Jen, but most of my friends with disability. You may even have been surprised by the joy we sometimes exhibit. There's no one-size-fits-all solutions to our very human, sometimes scary conditions. The team here tonight does not have all the answers, but we have the important questions. Let's acknowledge that people living with significant physical disabilities have the experience and expertise to figure out how they can live best. The mantra of the disability justice movement is nothing about us without us. We are who you are, or will be if you live long enough. Disability is the only identity group that can happen to anyone at any time. It's up to legislators, public servants, health professionals, ultimately voters, to make the world we all want and need. I'll leave you with a vision from one of my heroes, the great physicist, social thinker, and feminist, Ursula Franklin, whom I met in Halifax many years ago. She said, "A peaceful society should function like a potluck supper. A diversity of offerings is needed. Every person contributes their work and care, and in return finds nourishment and friendship." Is this not a vision we can all get behind? Thank you and good luck.
Okay, next we have Mary Burtt. She's a mother, a caregiver, a care planner for her terminally ill daughter Laura, who resides in long-term care facility. And can you please explain how your daughter came to be in long-term care, and how does her housing and care situation make you feel?
Sure. I'm sure many of you can identify with this scenario that I'm about to share. Your brand new baby is born, and with a heart bursting with love, you promise that you will always be there for her, you will always love her and keep her safe. I certainly made those promises to my daughter nearly 30 years ago when she was born. In 2007, she was diagnosed with a terminal disease that put her in a wheelchair, needing 24/7 care. I followed through on that promise. I left my job, I gave up an income, I adapted our home, and I devoted myself to making sure that my daughter was going to have the best life that it could possibly be. I made sure I kept her walking. I got her out in the community every day. I filled her life with all the things that she loved so that even though her lifespan was short, her life would be fulfilled. I became Laura's caregiver, planner, scheduler, social coordinator, the list goes on. But what there was no longer time for me to be was her mother. Physically caring for Laura, though, took its toll on my body, and my knee required repair in 2007. At that time, I approached both the Department of Health and the Department of Community Services to ask for support for Laura during my recovery period. The Department of Community Service offered me no options. The Department of Health, though, offered to put Laura in a lockdown dementia ward in Port Hawkesbury, 3 hours from home. You heard me right. There was absolutely no way I was going to place my vulnerable, beautiful 28-year-old daughter, who is unable to advocate for herself, in a lockdown dementia ward 3 hours away from home where I could not be there with her. With the help of many friends and agency services, I was able to keep Laura at home safe during my period of recovery, even though I was unable to assist physically. But at about week 4 of my recovery, it became very apparent that my knee was not healing as it should have, and the 6-week recovery period was probably going to become permanent. Therefore, I needed to make alternative plans for Laura, and fast. Given her need for 24/7 care, I had neither the resources or the the resources or the finances to keep her at home. So on January 21st, 2018, I moved Laura into the Adelaide Senior Care Home in Waverley. I knew she would be safe and cared for. What the home couldn't provide, though, to Laura was the stimulation that Laura requires for her physical and mental capabilities. So along with paying the monthly fee for Laura to live there, we opted to also pay for privately hired girls to go and take her out every day, so she could be a part of the community, be a part of life, and experience typical young adult activities. Laura will never fulfill the typical childhood dreams that every young girl has. She will never have a job. She will never meet her Prince Charming, fall in love, get married, and raise a family. These dreams were taken from Laura when she got sick. But what Laura does deserve is the opportunity to live a good life to the fullest and be included in her community. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities recognizes the equal rights of all persons with disabilities to live in their community with access to a range of in-home support, residential and other community support services necessary to support living and inclusion in the community. In 2013, the Nova Scotia provincial government, along with community members, created a roadmap report entitled Choice, Equality, and Good Lives in Inclusive Communities. The Nova Scotia legislature adopted this report and instituted a 10-year timeframe for significantly increasing community-based supported living options while decreasing reliance on large institutions. As of today, though, it appears that very little has been done. To the best of our knowledge, there are no new small options homes currently available for young adults, like Jen, like Laura, like many other young adults. It's time to work together and think creatively to develop options so that our young adults with severe physical disabilities can live a full life. Like all human beings, they deserve more than being institutionalized and segregated from their community.
Next, we have Joanne Larade, and she is an executive member of the Halifax chapter of Muscular Dystrophy and a resident of a long-term care facility. So, Joanne, what have you learned about yourself living in a long-term care facility?
I entered long-term care almost 6 years ago. When I first moved in, it was terrifying, but it was also exciting at the same time. However, as time went by, I soon learned the struggles I would be facing every day for the rest of my life. There is nothing that can prepare you for life in long-term care, especially at the age of 42. I quickly learned that I had to be incredibly patient and very, very strong. Living with 12 plus people, you learn very quickly where you sit on the totem pole. I am physically disabled, but I am completely cognitive. So living with a majority of seniors who have dementia, that don't understand what's going on, who do you think is last on that totem pole? Me. This is where your strength and patience has to come out. Living with dementia and Alzheimer's has to be the most difficult thing I will ever encounter in my life. If you have experienced it with one of your own family members, you know how hard it is to deal with on a daily basis. However, if you put yourself in our shoes, we live with not one, not two, not even three, but 5 and more roommates with this disease. Nobody has any idea how hard it is on our mental health, especially with no support. This is where your strength has prevailed. I realized that I don't know if I can live this way for the rest of my life. It's not fair, that just because we are physically disabled, that we are forced to live with people twice our age, with most of them suffering from dementia. It makes it impossible to even have a conversation with anyone except for staff. I want to make it clear that I'm not saying this to offend anyone I live with. They have all become my new family, and I care deeply for every one of them. I'm there to keep watch over them. I'm there to console them when they're lost. I'm there to keep them occupied when they're bored. I'm there for them all the time. However, some days it's just too much to handle. In the end, I can say what I've learned about myself is how incredibly strong I am, because I have to be. I am positive because I can't let myself go down. I've learned that I'm patient because it's not all about me. I've learned that I do make a difference in people's lives. I've learned that I am smart and can use my talents accordingly. I have learned that I'm a respected leader, and together we can bring change.
We're going to skip to Vicki and then come back. So, Vicki in the back. I'm just following Jen's rules here now. So, Vicki is a sexuality and disability educator, an advocate and a writer, and a resident of a long-term care facility. So, Vicki, what do you feel are the benefits of living in a long-term care facility?
So in order to answer this question, I have to go all the way back to when I was a little Vicki of 20. And I feel when I was 20 years old, I had just gotten out of the Nova Scotia rehab. I was suicidal and needed a lot of physical therapy because I had a surgery that didn't go quite right, and they kind of bunch of nerves, and I had a lot of pain and didn't sleep for like 2 years. It's really bad. So like, when I went home, I realized how different things were. Because when you're a child, your parents try to get you to do stuff. You're like, okay, because I'm your kid. But as I was growing up, I was like, I don't want to listen to you anymore. I don't want to go to bed when you tell me to. But they were my caregivers, so what choice did I have? So, for me, it was always an option. Even when I was a little girl, I was told, if you want to stay with us, we will do everything to make that happen. And they did. They put me a nice ensuite bathroom in my bedroom. It's gorgeous. It would be like, if I stayed home, I could have my own apartment. When I lived in the valley, I was dependent on beyond care because my parents couldn't do it all with burnout. But sometimes the caregivers wouldn't show up, and I would be stuck in bed. So my mom would feel that she was trapped in her own house because what if Vicki's caregivers do not show up and she wets herself, or gets hungry or thirsty and gets really sick because she's dehydrated. So she felt, for my safety, she felt trapped in her own house. And as the lady before me said, when my stepmother became my caregiver, she stopped being my mother. And we lost that connection as mother and daughter, and that was really hard on both of us. It turns out I thought it was just me, but I learned later it was really hard on her too to sort of lose her daughter in a way. So I decided that I couldn't go into a small orphan facility because I was told my care needs were too high. And the only nursing home in the province for young adults was unrestricted care, and that was my only option. Now, when they say young adult, what they mean, ladies and gentlemen, is anybody age 18 to 64. I don't know what you consider young adults. Young adult, I apologize to anybody from 64 in the room. And a lot of the people I live with are cognitively delayed. So, like Joanne mentioned, it's very hard to have a conversation. I'm very fortunate because I can go out on my own. A lot of people can't, so they're stuck there. I've heard several people say they want to kill themselves several times a day. That is a common phrase that you hear coming to people's rooms is somebody killed me quick. So, that's hard to hear every day. Which is why I'm such an advocate for medical assistance tonight, because nobody should have to do that. But what I find good about this, and why I put up with all this, is because I get 24/7 care. Before I had to arrange my life around my caregivers. Now I can arrange my caregivers around my life, and I know that no matter what happens, there'll always be someone there to fix it or help me fix it. So if I drop something and glass shatters everywhere, I don't have to wait 6 hours for someone to come clean it up, where it can be dangerous. If I want a glass of water, I know there's somebody out there that I can go, can I have a glass of water, please? When I first moved in, I was on a different unit, which had 54 residents and 6 staff. So, figure that one. And a lot of the people I lived with on that unit were violent. I was kicked, I was punched, I was slapped, and I was almost sexually assaulted. So, it was very, very scary. But besides that, we live in a small town with parents and have no opportunities for work or advancement of any kind. And that's something I didn't want to do. So I took the lemons and started out with pretty crappy lemonade. And slowly added a little more sugar to it to the point where it's drinkable, and I'm glad I can get what I need physically, and then I'm able to go out and do things for my own mental health. But as Joanne said, if you're stuck there, there are no mental health services. The reason I do so well is because my dad is a veteran and my mental health care is paid for. And if I'm telling you right now, if I didn't have that, I'd probably be dead by now. Because you can hear that day after day and have it not wear on you. So it's good, but it could definitely be better. And I think in order to do that, we have to start thinking of people with disabilities as one group. So separating the dementia or severely cognitive disabilities from the physical disabilities, because then everybody can get what they need. If you're trying to get care for everyone, somebody's gonna miss out. And we all just need to be treated like people. And the question I'd like to ask is to the people who run these facilities, because the on-the-ground staff is great, but the people who run these facilities, the management, I want to ask them, would you want to live here? And if the answer is no, then that's obviously something wrong with you that you have to look at. Thank you very much.
before we go to Q&A is Melanie Gahn, and she has an MA in Organizational Communications, is a resident of long-term care facility for the last 9 years, is involved with Dalhousie research study about adults with physical disabilities, and is an advocate for adults under 65, which we've now learned are called young adults, with physical disabilities. So, Melanie, what do you feel are the drawbacks of living in a long-term care facility?
Well, before I start, I should tell you that although these experiences are going to sound like they're coming from me, they're not just from me. They're from many of us. It's not about where someone lives. It's not about their facility, what is offered. It's not about their situation. It's about long-term care policies and protocols. It's important to remember that these issues are, I guess, positive. We'll let you know about them. And they're negative, and we can certainly talk about that. I may not be severely disabled, but I am disabled enough that I've had to live in long-term care since the age of 39 in 2010. I've experienced and witnessed enough that in 2014, Vicki and I started an advocacy group representing the physically disabled living in long-term care. Most of the problems occur at every facility, if not every, most. It's not about any of us specifically, but we'd like to look at solutions rather than problems for those of us who have to live in facilities. Sorry, little at odds here. My living situation is not ideal. It's certainly not how I would choose to live. It affects me. It affects my social life, my physical health, and definitely my mental health. I've basically been dropped into a facility where I'm surrounded by people twice my age, increasingly people with dementia, behavioral issues, or just plain old age. Now, let's get specific. And I'm going to tell you some of the drawbacks about living in a facility. Let's talk about food. Although a facility is required to feed you like you would eat at home, in reality, that's a very difficult thing for them to do. For instance, I'm gluten-free, I'm dairy-free, I'm beef-free. I choose to eat natural, and I choose to eat fresh and healthy. I have to specially order fruit plates for snack time, because snacks are almost always baked goods. Special events or menus don't always take my dietary concerns into account. Why? Because budget cuts tend to be felt by food services, therefore the residents, immediately or very shortly after. Do I like canned beans? Green beans from World War I? No, but after 9 years, a girl gets hungry. Today's seniors have small appetites. They like comfort food. Eating for their health is not their priority. They're using canned food, preserves, carbohydrates, and for whatever reason, ice cream. As often as possible. Let them eat cake, I say. I think they've earned it. But these days, we have larger appetites, and we want flavor, and we want fresh, and we want choice. Comfort food or clean food. There unfortunately isn't much of a choice. No matter how much I don't want dessert, after lunch or supper, Nova Scotia dinner. But I would like to maybe have an apple later. And my supper time is not at 4:30, my nap time is. Someone with physical disability may need to have their food prepared, and most likely fed. I know that sounds like very animalistic and basic, but that's what a lot of the time it turns out to be, despite the efforts of the staff of the organization. I've seen hot food put in front of people, then left there until after everyone else is served, and someone can feed them. People are left there looking at the table, smelling their food, seeing their food, just inches from their mouths. Isn't that an ancient torture method? I mean, to make things worse, when they do finally get fed, their food is usually cold. Let's talk about hygiene. Now, most facilities bathe their residents once a week. I have one thing to say to that. Two. I had to make a special request to have more than one bath or shower a week. Why? Because MS gets UTIs easily. I can't go a full week without a shower or a bath, or I'll get an infection. I should think that if someone has a severe physical disability, they need to be bathed more than once a week. A daily wipe down is simply not good enough. It's not realistic. Instead of quickly toweling everyone down for twice a day, why don't they take that time, perhaps, to give a second bath to the residents? It would increase the good health, it would increase their quality of life, their dignity, and after all, that's what we all want. Would you be okay with one bath a week? Would you be okay if your parent or your child got one bath once a week? One more minute? Sure. This brings me to a very important issue, staff to resident ratio. Quality of life, dignity, hygiene, and care of 13 residents, all with different individual needs. That requires way more labor than the government unrealistically allots. The labor allotted for one person is not for one person, but for 12 people. And it works out on average, I think, about 13 hours a week per individual. Is that enough to you? It's not to me. For someone living in long-term care, especially someone with a severe physical disability, maintaining a normal life is pretty much impossible. The type of programming isn't anything for myself that I typically want to do. What is socially acceptable today is not socially always acceptable to seniors. Swear it's not acceptable. If I've had a bad day and I want to drop an F-bomb in my own home, I'm gonna do it. Fashion, well, my hemlines are too high and my necklines are too low. My loose isn't loose enough. My tight is way too tight. Modesty is standard policy. And seasonal clothing, if any one of you needs a Christmas sweater.
I'm going to get you to stop there and then go to questions.
Thank you. Actually, it's stuck there, so.
Okay. First, I'd just like everyone to give a round of applause to our excellent panelists. we would like to hear lots and lots from each and all of you again. So what we're going to do for the next few minutes is open it up to questions. So the question can be in general to the panel, or it can be to a specific panel member. You are first. Nicely done. I wasn't even done yet. Game show.
For 30 years. Melanie and Victoria, I'd like to ask you, you mentioned that you have set up an advocacy group.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what you're doing. What have you accomplished thus far? What are your goals?
Well,
And who are, and what, who's in this group?
Joanne is also in the group. Vicky has gone on to bigger and better things. We are trying to really, our main focus is obviously long-term care housing altogether. And accessible transportation, that's a big one too. One of the big things that I was going to talk about is about the isolation that we feel that someone in long-term care feels. I mean, we don't get enough money on disability to provide bread, to provide a movie, to provide us anything that might be fun. It barely provides us for things that we don't want. I guess we've been working with Steve Craig and a couple of other city council members towards improving access, the accessible transportation in Halifax is difficult. It's, I don't know that I would use the word accessible.
Definitely not convenient.
No, not. Basically what we are trying to do is to represent everyone with physical disability between the ages of 18 and 64 who are disabled enough that we must live in long-term care in a facility. So we aren't doing it necessarily for us. Well, I'll probably age out before. We're doing it to pay it forward. It's not right. It's not a human right to have to live like this. I mean, this is not a pity trip for any of us. We are actively fighting living in isolation, and we want to represent people, and we want to make everyone else aware. So.
Thank you.
Another question? Yes.
I'm just wondering if you could
You speak
comment.
loudly, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I'm doing my best.
You can stand up.
No pressure.
No pressure. Well, first of all, just my first comment is that many of the long-term care facilities are for profit. But the question I had is it possible in any way to have a consensual and fulfilling sex life in long-term care?
Yes.
I know you'd like to elaborate on this.
Would you like me to?
I really love you too, yes.
Yes? Okay.
Same reason.
Keep it PG, dude.
I'm a sexuality educator. This is what I do. So, yes, it's possible to have fulfilling sex life. However, you have to have a partner who is very, very liberal and does not get embarrassed by much, because everybody in the facility within 10 minutes is going to know you're having sex. So, that's not due to me, that's just because living in a long-term care facility is like living in a small town. Everybody going to know all your business, and so the best thing to do is have a person who loves you and respects you enough to put up with the fact that their sex lives and their privacy are gone. I'm not going to go around like giving details, but everybody's going to know we've been doing stuff. So, I think it's just a matter of understanding and creating barriers, and my nurses and I have a system where I go to one that I really trust, and I say very plainly, I'm gonna have sex. They'll come in the room and like, what are you doing? And even then, even if you do, please don't. There's videos for that on the internet. But, yeah, so it's really just a matter of finding one person who understands that I'm a full person with needs, and that I have caregivers who realize that as well, and allow me to be a full person and respect my boundaries when it comes to a sex life. Thank you.
Went on to bigger and better things.
Yes.
My name's Edward Edelstein. I'm a developer on Gottingen Street, and I have an architecture office and a design build company. I happened to meet Jen through Tom, I don't know, 6 weeks or so ago. We're doing a project on Cornwallis, or on Gottingen near Cornwallis. We designed a 4-unit co-housing, I would call it, for Jen and hopefully 3 other highly disabled people. We approached the Department of Community Service, and I talked to 4 different counselors about it, and also someone at CMHC. It's not hard to design a 4-unit apartment for people that are highly disabled. It takes a little more room than normal. The problem is, unless it's able to be staffed by the funding from the province, I can't build it. The other problem is there's about $80,000 worth of special equipment, ceiling hoists, commode chairs, grab bars, and so on. Currently, there's no ability to fund that. So I'd ask the people in the room, if you're interested in perhaps helping fund at least the special equipment portion of it, get in touch with Jen and see if you can help. It wouldn't take much. I'm certainly willing to do what I can as a part of this larger building, but it's not a hard fix. Really, it just boils down to the economics of the additional shared care divided by 4 people. The architecture part of it's not hard. We're fortunate we have a nice site on Gottingen Street. We have a daycare at the back, so these people could be seeing young children playing. In a way, it's kind of ideal. We're waiting, we'll wait to see if the government can find a way in their current models to help fund it or not, for Jen, who has a timeline. That said, Carrie there from Independent Living is also working on a report for the province for larger projects, and you might just want to share that so people know what you're working on. Thank you.
Just to, I guess, briefly follow up, we are actually working with Ed and Jen as
Harry,
well.
can you speak up? A lot of people can't hear.
Sorry.
Yell at people, man, that's what I did.
So we've been working with Jen and Ed on this co-housing unit as well, and I believe that we're definitely making progress as far as being able to present to the folks that we need to. I feel very positive in that instance, but we're also, Independent Living Nova Scotia is also looking at creating a business model around shared attendant care and allowing folks with severe physical disabilities the ability to live within their communities, and knowing that there isn't a one-size-fits-all or a cookie-cut approach to this, that there are definitely different scenarios that we have to look at, and be able to find solutions and present. And we are actually in the process of doing an interim report around that, on the findings that we've had thus far. We received 14 weeks worth of funding in order to be able to start developing, and I mean, that's only, I think, a start. There's many, this is sort of like an onion, and there's many facets to it to be able to have a working model that we'll be able to, implement within the province of Nova Scotia, because we're looking at both, urban areas as well as rural areas, because the HRM isn't the only place that severely physically disabled people live. So, yeah. So I, to be honest with you, I think that we're making some headway. And I think that we've had the opportunity to have a conversation with folks. So I think, Jen, we're doing good work, aren't we? We're trying. So.
All right, folks. So that brings us to the end of our panel tonight. First of all, we want to thank all of you guys for coming. We really appreciate everyone attending, and we really want to thank the excellent panel. Thank you.